Well, we have a nice turnout today. We're thrilled to welcome Mike Shaughnessy to our Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. My name is Michael Goldberg. I'm our Executive Director of the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve University and also a professor at Weatherhead. I was connected to Mike, knew much about Mike, but connected to him through our colleague and friend, Joyce Fitzpatrick at our School of Nursing, who's going to say a few words about Mike and Marion Shaughnessy and the work that they're doing at the Leadership Academy. And then Joyce will turn it over to our student moderator. We're always thrilled to have our students run the show. So Nick Valenta, who's an undergraduate nursing student, is going to be, and looks so small in this, sitting at the HEC, but it's great to have you, Nick. We want this to be interactive, so Nick's going to sort of run the show and ask questions, but if you're on Zoom, please let Nick know if you have questions by raising your hand or putting a question in the chat. And if you're watching on LinkedIn Live, just put a question in the comment and then we'll make sure that we feed it to Nick. Right. And Joyce, let me turn it over to you as we get Mike on his other device and continue with the introductions.
Thank you very much, Michael, and I'm very pleased to co-sponsor this event for the Marion K. Shaughnessy Nurse Leadership Academy. For those of you who don't know our work, we're fairly new at Case Western Reserve. The Academy was founded by Marion and Michael Shaughnessy to create Francis Payne Bolton's School of Nursing as the leadership destination for nurses and nursing. And so we have a number of global programs, national programs, and local programs. And I would invite you to join us on our website to learn more about the programs. You'll be hearing more about us because we are going to be partnering with the Veale Institute to bring to you other nurse entrepreneurs, but besides some that you may know about. So you'll hear more about nurse entrepreneurship in the future because that's an important part of our future goals through the Shaughnessy Leadership Academy. I see many of our faculty on board, some of our advisory board members, and I welcome you all as well. We're pleased that Mike Shaughnessy has joined us today, and we're anxious to hear about his company and his success. It's my pleasure, though, to introduce you to Nicholas Valenta, an undergraduate student at our School of Nursing at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve. Nick is a second-year student in the BSN program. He's involved in the university marching band and in symphonic winds and the Global Ethical Leaders Society. Nick also works as a campus tour guide for new students, introducing them to the Case Western Reserve community. And he's a leader among others in the orientation program. He is also currently the Undergraduate Student Nurses Association representative to the Francis Payne Bolton Advisory Board of the Marion K. Shaughnessy Nurse Leadership Academy. And I can tell you, we have learned a lot from Nick's involvement in our internal advisory board. And Dr. Celeste Alves, who's on this call, is co-chair of the advisory board, along with Dr. Rebecca Patton. So we've been very pleased to have Nick as a part of our advisory board. So with that, Nick is going to be the moderator for this event. And so I'd like to turn it over to Nick Valenta.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Fitzpatrick. It's been a real great pleasure of mine to be a part of the Nurse Leadership Academy. And now I'm going to introduce our guest of honor, Michael Shaughnessy. Mr. Michael Shaughnessy is a phenomenally well-accomplished businessman, entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist. He is the former president of ColorMatrix, a liquid color dispersant manufacturing company, for which he pioneered numerous coloring techniques that remain the industry standard today. The story of ColorMatrix is detailed in Mr. Shaughnessy's 2014 co-memoir, Living in Color, Growing ColorMatrix Step by Step. Another accomplishment of his is the development of the sales-first business model, which prioritizes product sales over capital investments. Mr. Shaughnessy and his late wife, Marion, who held a doctorate of nursing practice degree and founded the Nurse Leadership Academy at Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing, have consistently demonstrated their commitment to the greater Cleveland community, Case Western Reserve University, and nursing as a whole. We are beyond grateful for their contributions, and we're elated that Mr. Shaughnessy is joining us today.
Nick, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Delighted to be here, and I'm addressing you all from sunny California, where it's overcast today, and probably be out here for the next couple months, and then back to sunny tropical Cleveland. So, Nick, why don't you go ahead and get us started off?
Absolutely. So just to get us started here, Mr. Shaughnessy, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the major events in your career that ultimately led you to start ColorMatrix?
Okay, sure. I'd be happy to do that. First, I generally like to talk a little bit about this because so many people, when they're at the college level, they think that people who have started their own companies had a reserve of capital that from either relatives or friends or lending institutions that made the transition for them to be in their own business a lot easier than starting up with a very low capital base. And I would, by way of background, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, a little suburb of St. Louis, and went to St. Louis University. My mother and father my dad was a shift foreman for McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom until I got to high school age, and she decided that she didn't want me to go to some of the high schools that I had expressed an interest in attending. So she went on and she got a job working at a bakery so that she could support me in high school at a private boys' school in St. Louis by the name of Chaminade, which was a Catholic boys' school, is a Catholic boys' school. So anyway, I graduated from Chaminade and was accepted to St. Louis University, where I, under the advice of my counselors, decided I would major in chemistry, minors in math and physics, which I did, and I really loved it. I loved the academic side of that. I wasn't much of an experimental chemist. I didn't follow the protocol as well as I should have to be a recognized technician, but I did understand the theory and really enjoyed it. So come along about my senior year, my mother said, well, what are you going to do now that you're graduating? And I said, well, I don't really know. She said, well, I think you ought to go get a job because you're running out of your time here at home with your parents. So I went out and started to interview, and I went to interview with a company called Mallinckrodt Chemical, which is a very old chemical company in St. Louis. And quite coincidentally, as I'm on my way to interview with the HR people, I was in the elevator, and this little guy with a cigarette holder and a long cigarette looking at me, and he says, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to interview for a job as a laboratory person. And he looked over at me and he says, you don't want to do that. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, no. He says, when you get finished with your interview with HR, he says, come and see me. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, my name is Danny Freeze. So I said, okay. So I finished my administrative work with HR, and I told the lady in HR, I said, well, I had met this gentleman in the elevator, and he asked me to come and see him when we finished here. And she said, well, who was that? And I said, Danny Freeze. He introduced himself to me. And she said, do you know who Danny Freeze is? I said, I have no idea. She said, well, he's the sales manager for North America. I said, oh, wow. So anyway, I went to see Danny Freeze, and he sat me down and he said, look, I've chatted briefly with you, but I can tell that you really don't want to belong in a laboratory. He says, I think you probably have more of a personality for being out in front of customers and being out in the marketplace. So he said, with your permission, I'm going to put you through a sales training program, and hopefully that'll result in you being a salesman for us. And that sounded pretty interesting to me because I really didn't have any career path. And you'll hear me talk all the time about how significant it is in life to have mentors when you don't have family or business associates that can help you out. Seems like mentors have a way of finding you. and you always need to keep your eye out for them. So anyway, I was with Mallinckrodt for about 8 years, sales territories in New York and Cleveland, ended up in Cleveland, and was with Mallinckrodt for 8 years. And then I wasn't too happy with the direction the company was going versus my interest. And I was more interested in the plastics industry. Mallinckrodt was more interested in the healthcare field, pharmaceuticals and medicinal chemicals. So I ended up leaving the company and went to work for a company called Cincinnati Millicron in Cincinnati, which was an emerging market leader in the processing of chemicals for plastic stabilization, principally PVC. And for those of you who don't know what PVC is used for, it's a plastic that's used in pipe and siding, PVC pipe and siding for municipal water, sewage pipe, and siding for PVC house siding. So anyway, I did that for about 5 years and had an opportunity to really get my feet wet. I progressed quickly through the organization and became sales manager for the Midwest. And as through that, had an opportunity to meet a lot of senior level people in the industry. And one of the guys that I used to compete against in my earlier career, or my earlier job, came to me and he says, Mike, how you doing? I said, I'm doing great. I'm a big shot sales manager. And he says, no, how much money are you making? I told him, he says, you're not doing so great. He said, you really got to come and talk to me. So Cameron Duff was his name, and he introduced me to a gentleman in Cleveland who had heard of me through my market reputation. And he offered me a position as a manufacturer's rep, which is a little different. I'm still selling, but I was being paid on a commission basis rather than a salary. So Gary Curtis was his name. And he gave me an opportunity to become, as he put it, your own man. So I covered the PVC market for his company, which was called Synthetic Products. And through that opportunity, I ran into another small company over in Chicago that was in the colorant business, undercapitalized, and was looking for an opportunity to expand over into Ohio. So I was able to do the manufacturer's rep job and work with that little color company in Ohio. I had built a substantial income from the rep business. And in February 23rd, 1983, I was fired from the rep business by the head of Kraft Foods, who had acquired the business by this time and left me without an income. So I felt like I needed to burn the boats and spend my time on what I could really had control over, which is how I got more involved with the plastics colorant business. And later on, we changed the name of the company to ColorMatrix, and we'll go into the history of that later on. So anyway, that's kind of a brief summary of my professional career and how I managed to go into my own business.
Thank you so much. That was a very well-spoken answer. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the history of ColorMatrix?
Yeah, and so ColorMatrix was originally was a joint venture. The small company over in Chicago that I mentioned was undercapitalized. They wanted to expand not just sales coverage in Ohio, but also they wanted to establish a manufacturing base, but they didn't have any money. And at the time, I had a fairly significant commission income. And I said, well, how much do you think it needs to start a plant up over here in Ohio? And they gave me a number. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you're willing to give me controlling interest in a separate business over here in Ohio, operating under license from you, I'll finance the startup out of my own pocket through my earnings. And they agreed to that. And the business plugged along for the next couple of years because the technology was not very well accepted in the marketplace at the time. So I had difficulty making penetrations in markets where liquid colors were being used. And so I went back to my old friends in the PVC pipe business and asked them, I said, well, you use color in your PVC pipe. How about working with me on color? And of course, I had developed a reputation with those people, and they were willing to give me a chance. And so I started supplying those people with relatively large quantities of color, which was color coded for its use. For instance, Blue PVC pipe was for fresh water, drinking water. Green was for sewage pipe. Gray was for electrical conduit. And most of these pipes were underground. So, you know, in the event they had to be maintained for some reason, you know, the tradesmen would dig down and they'd see blue, and they knew that that was fresh water pipe, and green was for sewer pipe. And they didn't want to confuse those two. So color coding was the basis on which I established that colorant used for PVC pipe. So that was really a big step forward in establishing the business. Then the guys over in Chicago, they built their business to a point where they felt they wanted to sell it, and one of the big chemical companies in Chicago had offered them a value proposition that they wanted to take advantage of. And in the process, they had forgotten that they had given me 51% ownership in the Ohio company. And so by this time, one of my salesmen from Cincinnati Millicron joined me in what became ColorMatrix. And we decided that we really didn't want to take advantage of that offer. So we bought the 49% ownership of the small company we were working with. Then we went our separate ways, and we changed the name of our company to ColorMatrix. And we were able to remove any geographic limitations that we had been presented with as part of our licensing agreement. So that's really when we kind of kicked off in the high gear, because many of our contacts through the industry were located throughout the United States and not just in the Ohio area. So that's when things started to move for us well. And that was probably 5 years after we had started our relationship with that small company in Chicago.
Wow, that all happened very quickly then.
It did.
And you mentioned a little bit about how, you know, Kraft bought one of the companies that you had been working for at the time and how you'd become frustrated with that. Now, I have a feeling that a lot of these larger companies probably aren't very supportive of their employees moving forward with their own ideas. What was that process like for you?
Well, when I was with Cincinnati Millicron, I turned in my resignation when I was going to become an independent rep. And the president of the company called me into his office. He says, "What are you doing? Do you know what you're leaving? You know, we're really special, and we're the leaders in the industry for what we do. And you're going to go into something more of a commodity-oriented business. And, you know, there's no glory in that." And I said, "Well, no, there's income in that." And he says, "Well, assuming you'll be successful." But he did everything he possibly could to have me challenge my decision that I was going to leave the big company, the security of the big company, and go into my own business with no security at all. Turns out he was partly right and partly wrong, because, as I mentioned before, the company that we repped for ended up terminating our relationship, not because we did a bad job. We did too good a job, and they felt they could do it cheaper. So with, say, 4 or 5 salesmen rather than just 1 or 2. So that's what prompted their decision to terminate our relationship. So in that respect, the gentleman from Cincinnati Millicron was correct. But in the other respect, he was wrong, because the ColorMatrix business provided much more economic and commercial opportunity than staying with the big company did. But you're right. The big companies want you to feel secure with them, and they really don't want you to be venturing out into doing something on your own.
And so given that, you know, ColorMatrix developed so quickly, I imagine that there were some bumps in the road. What were some of the early challenges that ColorMatrix experienced, and how were they overcome?
Yeah, well, probably the most significant thing that we ran into as an obstacle was that when we decided to buy out our minority shareholder in Illinois, one of our laboratory people got wind of that, and they misunderstood what was going to take place. They thought we were going to sell the company, and they would be possibly out of a job. So there was some, you know, this particular person was going through a rather nasty divorce. He had found his wife had been unfaithful to him, and the company was his security. So he was really upset, and he went to our former shareholders and partners in Chicago, and he told them that he thought we were doing things that were inappropriate for the applications that we were selling him into. And he, more specifically, he said he thinks we were poisoning people, which was totally incorrect. We were using completely FDA approved materials. And but the guys in Chicago had had a negative feeling about us because we didn't go along with their deal. So they led this guy to the FBI, and the FBI came and saw me one night and paid us a visit with a search warrant and took a whole bunch of documents, and subpoenaed a bunch of our customers' records. And of course, for the next 2 years, we were terrified because we thought we were going to lose the business. They weren't listening. They didn't want to hear us, what we had to say. We weren't allowed an interview with the investigating officers. But at the end of the day, our customers came to our defense and said, what are you doing to these guys? They've been supplying us for a while, and it's good products. We've got a great position with them. They've been great suppliers. They use FDA approved materials, so nobody's getting poisoned. And so the FBI agent that was given the task of investigating us got an all expense trip paid to North Dakota, where he spent the rest of his career. And the young man who had gone and was the quote whistleblower, if you will, was terminated and ended up selling used cars about 100 miles south of us. And that's the last I heard of him. So that could have been devastating for us. Fortunately, our customers improved our credibility with the federal investigators, and life went on and things. And in 7 years later, which is the statute of limitations on this kind of thing, we got a box full of documents from Parcel Post that were the documents that were taken from our offices when the FBI paid a visit to us, which was the signal that it was all over. So anyway, that was probably the most devastating thing that happened to us. And I wouldn't wish that on any startup.
Yes, that sounds like that was a very harrowing experience. Were there any other challenges that come to mind when you were first starting?
Well, I would just say that the other challenges we had were more related to market acceptance and going through the hurdles requiring certification for use through the food agencies for some new applications. One of our, we were very dedicated to the PVC industry, and a consultant over in Toledo came to us and said, look, we consult for Coca-Cola and Colgate-Palmolive, and they were concerned that their major resin supplier was going to discontinue the use of resin that contained the color in it. And they were going to have to find another way of coloring the plastic. For Coca-Cola, that meant they had to find another way of coloring Sprite green, Dasani blue, the little water bottle blue. And for Colgate-Palmolive, they had to find a new way of toning recycled PET, which tends to go yellow when it's reprocessed. So we provided them with a toner that disguised the yellow color and made it look more like natural virgin resin. So once we went through that whole qualification process, because Coke is really particular, they don't want to take any chances with their brand, as you might imagine. The same thing with Colgate-Palmolive. So the hurdles that we had to climb to get approved and considered a reliable supplier were very, very demanding and very difficult. But once that was achieved, and that took place over about 2 years, we were then specified as the sole supplier. And as Coke expanded into other parts of the world, into China, into Eastern Europe, Australia, South America, they came to me and they said, would you be interested in going with us to those new markets for us? And by the way, if you're not, we'll find somebody else who is. And I said, oh no, we're real happy to go with you. And so what that did is it gave them the assurance of knowing that the company they were dealing with in the United States, they knew exactly where we lived, where our plant was, how to reach us. So they weren't dependent on someone over in China supplying them with a product or a source that they didn't have any familiarity with. So what turned out to be a hard battle to win, all of a sudden, the geographic opportunities opened up for us all over the world. And we ended up with 13 manufacturing sites in different parts of the world, supplying markets that we would have never even thought of trying to pursue without the help of somebody big like Coca-Cola and Colgate-Palmolive, and then ultimately Pepsi-Cola doing the same thing. So that was really the step that put us on the map. We became a very well recognized name in the PET beverage bottle business through our relationships with Coke and Pepsi. And that really kicked the 5, 10%, 15% growth per year business into a 25, 30, 40, 50% growth business. Set us up to set up manufacturing operations in other parts of the world. We had several joint ventures where we had the controlling interest in the company, with the exception of the UK, which was an equal ownership arrangement. But it was really a very successful enterprise for us. We then developed other products for the PET packaging market. And big companies like BP came to us. They'd been working on a product that they patented for about 7 years. And they never got any more than a couple $100,000 in sales, because they were used to selling rail cars full of resin, not drums worth of additives. So they came to us and initially licensed us to sell their products. And within 2 years, we were selling, instead of 100,000 or 200,000 in sales, we were selling $40 million worth of that product, which was an oxygen scavenger, meant it would protect the contents of oxygen sensitive foods like fruit juices, beer, that would degrade in plastic over a relatively short time. So again, that was another opportunity for us within the same market space to grow our business. So.
Wow, that is quite the success story. Are there any other successes that you can think of that you'd like to share as the company grew?
Well, I would say we did a number of things in smaller markets. I mentioned the BP technology. We ultimately bought that business out of BP's patent portfolio when they had a big fire down in the Gulf Coast. The board of BP said, let's get out of businesses that are not core to our technology. So the product we had licensed from BP became a technology we purchased from BP, which eliminated any royalty payments in the future. And that was a big number. I mean, it was a big number for us to buy it. The other thing is when we got to about $100 million in sales revenue, we decided that we knew how to get that far, but in order to grow fast and continue to grow fast, we needed a source of capital. So we formed a relationship with a private equity group in Boston by the name of Audax, and they bought controlling interest in the company. And then we were given an opportunity to reinvest with them in the new company, which was just called ColorMatrix again, but it was a shareholder difference in ownership. And with that, we consolidated all of our joint ventures under the same ownership structure. And while that really teed us up for the future, it wasn't as significant in terms of growing the business as it was when we broke into the PET business with Coke. But that having been said, without that, we would have only been considered we would not be considered a global company. We'd be considered an international company. And as you go further down the road, since we struck an arrangement with a private equity investor, their business model is after 3 to 5 years, they spin the business off again to another interested party. And the other interested parties would really be more interested in a global business than an international business. Same management structure, same cost structure, same central research and development, et cetera, et cetera. And turned out after 5 years, we had weathered the storm with the economic downturn in 2007, 8, and 9. We continued to grow the business. So we agreed with our investors that before the world forgot about what happened in 7, 8, and 9, it'd be a good time to market the business to the industry. And so as a result of that, Poly One in Avon Lake bought the company, and they were a strategic buyer. So they integrated the company into their operations. They left the business manufacturing center, this sales organization, the management of ColorMatrix alone. And, but we reported into their financial structure as an integral part of their company. They've since changed their name and gone on to bigger things. But so that's kind of, those are kind of the big things that happened to us in the growth of the business.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was really interesting to hear about how you ultimately did end up getting a private equity firm involved. So moving on, what sort of inspiration is really necessary when someone wants to start a new company, and is having a specific vision or idea critical to the process?
Well, I always advise young people before they start, and I'll exclude from this comment, you know, the IT business, because I don't know anything about the IT business. I don't know how you start one, and so I qualify my remarks by admitting that. But in a traditional business, I would suggest that you really, you know, as you come out of school, you get some kind of a degree, and you learn, you know, how to speak a language of whatever, manufacturing, operations, purchasing, marketing, whatever that language is. For me, it was chemistry. And so you have to do something with that. I mean, so for me, I went to work for a big company where I didn't have any commercial sense whatsoever, and let them teach me the business side of the business. And I would recommend that strongly to anyone who's considering that graduation coming up and thinking about what they want to do with their career. Find something that you like, a business, product, a market that you think makes sense for you, and find someone in that business and go to work for them. Learn the business. Because what will happen, you'll probably go to work for a big company. And big companies they don't like to make a lot of variations on a theme. They like to reduce the number of SKUs that they make. And anything beyond that of expanding SKUs requires a pretty substantial market opportunity. So as an employee of a big company, I saw some niches that the big company wasn't paying attention to, or didn't want to pay attention to, that I thought were opportunities for someone like me. So when I went to work, for instance, for Cincinnati Millicron, I went from one big company to another, but it was in view of the fact that I saw something in the products and the markets that the new company served that was more aligned to what my interests were. So I piggybacked on my business experience at Mallinckrodt and took that experience to Cincinnati Millicron. I was not competitive with Cincinnati Millicron, but I was in the same marketplace. So I had contacts and influences that I could take advantage of. And then when I had the opportunity to go into my own business, believe me, I was as much of a gullible buy-in guy for the big company story up until I started my own company. And believe me, that first day I started my own company, while I believed in myself, I didn't know whether my customers had more loyalty to me or to my former employer. Would they treat me any differently than they would if I hadn't known them before? And as it turns out, those relationships are very important. While I wasn't competitive, I knew the same people and gave them the opportunity, presented them the opportunity of what I was doing. And the guy who really was the linchpin for me was a fellow by the name of Arnold Coldarn. And Arnold is 91 years old now. He still is a great friend. He's retired now, of course, and still is a great friend. And I thank him for having been my first customer. I went to see him one night when I had my manufacturer's rep opportunity presented to me. And I said to the guy that presented it to me, I said, well, you know, what if it doesn't work? He said, well, I believe it will work. I believe you'll make it work. So I went to Mr. Coldarn's house and I said, Arnold, I said, I got this great opportunity. What do you think? He said, I'm surprised you haven't done it before. I said, really? So he said, what can I do for you? I said, if I had 1/2 of the commodity that you buy, that would be it. It would cover my cost. So he says, fine, you got it. I assume you'll be price competitive. I said, as far as I know, I will be. So, you know, I tell people that because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't set out chart my course to be a manufacturer's rep and then be in the color business. But, it's like the horizon, when you're heading down the road, you see this horizon, you get a little further down the road, you can see a little farther, the next horizon. And that's what happens. If you have the good sense and intuition to start off with a well-defined plan and objective, that's fine. I didn't. I sort of walked along and saw opportunities. They presented themselves to me either through mentors or through market opportunities, and took advantage of them. And I would recommend that to anybody that starts their own company. I see we're kind of on time-wise, we're kind of running close to the limit. So, if you have any questions from the students or attendees, I'd be happy to answer any of them that I could.
I have two in the chat so far. So the first one says, I've heard that there are many owners of regional manufacturing companies looking to retire and sell their businesses. Do you see this to be true in this region?
Absolutely. Today, while I'm no longer involved with ColorMatrix, I'm involved with two private equity investment companies. And our market space is in companies that do probably 30 to 40 million in sales, and maybe have an earnings before interest and taxes of $3 to $5 million. That's sort of our sweet spot, and manufacturing companies. So one of the reasons that people hire an investment banker to help them sell their companies is that they've had their companies for a long time. They built them. They don't have a succession plan, any relatives or children that are interested in the business. So they have to protect their employees and provide them some security in their future. So they'll sell the business rather than go to the grave with it. And they may stay with the company for a period of time mutually agreed upon by the buyer. But that's exactly the reason that many companies are sold, is that the buyer is getting to a point in his life where he needs to think about the succession plan, and selling or bringing in a financial investor, either staying on with the financial investor or retiring and letting the financial investor bring in a new CEO. Those are viable options. And the other reason people sell is that they, like me, we needed to grow our business from 100 to 250 million in revenue. And I wasn't sure I had the internal fortitude to go out and leverage the company's debt to finance the purchase of other companies. So we found a private equity group who was very familiar with, and they do this every day. They go out and they buy companies, and they do it with all debt, which scares the hell out of me. So, but it was a very successful way of doing it. But they had experience in that, and they knew how to finance those kind of deals. So the other reason is that if you have a company and you want to grow it, and you feel somewhat limited in your capital resources, you might want to bring in a financial buyer who will take on a percentage, and many times it's a majority ownership, and you retain a minority ownership and continue to grow the business through acquisitions, either technology or manufacturing. So that speaks, I think, to your question.
Yes, absolutely. And we have another one that just came through. What would you say was your biggest mistake as an entrepreneur? Well,
I would say that, first off, John Houck, who's not with us today, normally we do these things together, but he's on a plane somewhere. And, we were equal partners in the business. And I won't say one of the mistakes we made, but one of the biggest watch outs you have is that most partnerships, equal partnerships, fail. They don't fail because the business is bad. They fail because the partnership is bad. It sounds good in the beginning, but one gets a little jealous of the other one, or thinks he's working harder than the other one, got better relationships with the other one, does things at the company that the other one wouldn't do. All sorts of reasons why conflict can get built in. So first off, I would say don't get involved in an equal partnership. But I would say that if you do, be sure you know very well Don't bring your brother-in-law in. You know, don't keep it separate from your family. But I think the biggest mistake that we made as a company, we didn't see the future as it was going to turn out. So we ended up moving our business 4 times in the Cleveland area, from a little small shop to a little bigger shop to a bigger shop to ultimately a substantial facility out in Berea. It was a Farmer Penton publishing facility, and there we felt it was, it was all we would really need. So we could have anticipated that with a little more confidence. But again, as I said, we didn't know what we didn't know. And another thing I think we could have done a better job on earlier is that when we got into the business, we wanted to be in the city of Cleveland because real estate was inexpensive, lots of empty buildings, labor was relatively competitively priced. We hired a lot of inner city people. Initially, people that would walk in off the street and fill out an application. But ultimately, we partnered with Leadership Cleveland, which is now called something else. I forget right now what the name is. And they provided the training to teach people who had never worked before what a job's all about. Here's an alarm clock. When you're told to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, you be at work every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, not just 2 or 3 days. When you're told to do something that seems menial, don't take it as a personal offense. There's only so far down the food chain you can go to get certain things done. But what we found in that whole exercise is that I don't think we really viewed our employees as an integral part, certainly the manufacturing department as an integral part of our company. We treated them as expendable, and that was a mistake. As time went on, particularly as we established a relationship with Leadership Cleveland, we found that the people really that we hired who had never worked before, and this was during a period of time when President Clinton started the Welfare to Work initiative, and it was primarily designed to help single females who had children get a job rather than collect welfare. And the program was hugely successful. And while for most of our hires were females, it later evolved into first offenders that became trained through Leadership Cleveland, Cleveland Works, and that we hired. And we found that the people that we had taken for granted initially really became very loyal employees. They loved working for us. We were fair with them. We paid a fair market wage to live on. We put them into our profit sharing plan. We created a 401k plan for them, and encouraged them to and paid health insurance. And so they had a number of benefits that a lot of at-will employees don't have. And I think they really appreciated what we did for them. They were all included in our general business meetings when we brought the company together to talk about either opportunities that we were experiencing or challenges we were having in the marketplace, where we had to tighten our belt a little bit. But we changed a lot of people's lives for the better. And I'm just sorry we didn't recognize that earlier, that we had that ability to do that for people. So that's a big deal. That's in my book, in our book. Okay.
Yeah, that was a very wonderful and thoughtful answer, Mr. Shaughnessy. We are just about out of time now. So thank you everyone for attending, whether you're on Zoom with us or you're watching this from LinkedIn. Hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Thank you to the Veale Institute for hosting this. Thank you to Dr. Fitzpatrick for reaching out to me and asking me to moderate today.
Wishing your group a wonderful success. Thanks for having me on.